live on the GoToMeeting or the YouTube?
Let's give it a second.
We're good to go? Okay. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Jason Salento. I have the great honor of being the mayor of Denellen, and we're very happy to have you all here tonight for our town hall in discussing the understanding of redevelopment in Denellen. This evening, we have some of our professional services who assist us with redevelopment in Denellen to speak with you about the progress we've made in Denellen and understanding the process and what we've been up to. So to my left, we have Gabriel Baylor. He's our planner from DMR Architects. We have Charles Leland and Sandy Galatio of Wendell Marks Lane and Mindoff. We have Daniel Marinello of NW Financial Group. They're our financial advisors. And we have Matthew Jeffa, who is one of our redevelopment counselors, and bond counsel. Charles and Sandy is also part of our redevelopment council. I want to give a shout out to some officials that are in the room this evening. We have our borough administrator, William Robbins, in the back over here. He's been an instrumental part on the ground on helping redevelopment over the years. We have council member Paul Sigmund, council member Hal Vandermark. We have our CFO back there, Scott Olson, our chairman of the planning board, Roger Dornier. I see our OEM coordinator, Homer Mosley. We have our code enforcer, George Dean, our parking authority member, Mr. Locke. And who else am I missing? We have former elected officials in here as well, Mr. Kenneth Distal. So, and we'll be getting to him in a moment. And I know Council Member Trina Rios is online. So I also want to extend thanks to the Denellen School District IT team, Ronnie Haynes and David Petzinger, who are assisting us today with our IT and making everything live for those who are at home. As well as I want to say thank you to Alex Miller who helped set up this evening. So the main topic today is redevelopment in Denellen. And so my part in the early parts of this conversation discuss the history of redevelopment in Denellen. As you can see with the art color complex going up, we are in the process of what I would say is revitalization of our downtown. And this didn't just happen overnight. This has been many years in the making. And we see progress now, and we're going to begin seeing progress in the downtown over the next few years. So in 2001, just to start us off, the Denellen Mayor, Robert Cedar, and the Denellen Council authorized the Denellen Planning Board to conduct a preliminary investigation on whether the areas between Route 28 from Middlesex to Plainfield qualify as an area in need of redevelopment. Mr. Distal, he was part of that team from the beginning, so is Mr. Dornbier. So before we actually go further, I want to give them a round of applause for the work that they did, along with Mayor Cedar. So with this study came along to 2003, where the planning board created the report on a study to determine the qualification of the Denellen Downtown Redevelopment Study Area as a redevelopment area. And what that was presented to the Denellen Planning Board on April 28, 2003. So the redevelopment plan is basically the town's roadmap for how these developers build their properties. The resolution was then forwarded over to the mayor and council, which accepted it by resolution of May of the same year and designated a subject area in need of redevelopment at Ironton Town. In 2004, the full Denellen Downtown Redevelopment Plan Phase 1 was adopted by ordinance with periodical updates over time. This document is the basic zoning and land use blueprint for the redevelopment. It's designated 3 areas, as you can see. Site number 1, which is north of train stations, that's between Prospect and Washington along North Avenue. Site number 2, which is the train station, it's south of the train station, which is along New Market and South Washington Avenue. And then site number 3, which is the art color complex we see being developed along the tracks at Columbia Street, which we all know is our color, which is going to be called Denellen Station. Later, we would amend the redevelopment plan to what's called site number 4. That's the remaining of the downtown parcel. So that's Route 28, so Boundbrook Road, and North Avenue between the Plainfield border and the Middlesex border, and 1 block north and south of that street. In late 2004, historical point, the Art Color Complex, the owners of it, made it known that they wanted to turn the site into a multi-use of housing and retail spacing, and several developers made proposals. So in 2006, the mayor and council designated Kaplan Companies as a redeveloper at the time. So the condition of the designation was an agreement between the borough and Kaplan, and that they would arrive in a certain period of time. In 2007, unfortunately, the agreement could not be reached, and Kaplan was de-designated as the redeveloper, and Baker Residential was selected as the redeveloper. Unfortunately, as we all know, in 2007, 2008, before the borough and Baker Residential could reach an agreement, we had the housing market crash, and the formal redevelopment activities were put on hold by the request of the redeveloper because of the downfall of the economy. But that didn't stop the borough, because in 2011, the mayor and council continued their efforts with redevelopment by the creation and approval of a master plan. So this basically sets the vision, and we will hear more about that along the panel for what the roadmap for redevelopment will be over the next decade. In 2012, Denellen was designated a 26th transit village. Is that the correct number, Ken? That's it. And we can let's give him another round of applause because of his efforts. So this provides the town access to state funds and grants through the NJDOT. Successful grants to date, you'll see the Victorian lights throughout the downtown along Washington Avenue. Those were all possible because of becoming a transit village. It promotes the downtown as what's called a TOD, which is transit-oriented development. For investors and builders, and it helps builders get financial support from banks and investors, because the banks and the investors see that the town itself is committed to redeveloping it as a TOD. So it's a stronger application for them. Fast forward to 2017, the economy slowly began to recover, and the art complex owners expressed interest in redeveloping the site again. This time they decided to develop it in a partnership with established builders. So on July 13th of 2017, the mayor and Denellen council, by resolution, entered into an agreement with Brudman Redevelopment Partners Urban Renewal LLC. It was agreed upon that on the 19-acre site, known as the Denellen Station now, there would be 130 townhomes for sale, 252 apartments for rent, with 58 of the rental apartments being affordable housing. There will also be, as you can see up front, a 10,000 square foot commercial retail building in the former location of the World Gym site, and it will look like an old-fashioned train station. You can find all the information on Denellen's website, denellen-nj.gov. There's a redevelopment tab. You can see all of this on there, as well as facts, and we'll put all this information up there.
Ian, you do me a favor? Go look on top of my dresser and bring my headphones.
Can we mute them? As you can see, where there's a pool, the residents of the complex will have access to a clubhouse with a community room, barbecue area, gym, and of course, a pool. So with this development, we're going to be welcoming in the next 2 years over 600 new residents. It'll be done by 2 developers. The townhomes will be done by K. Pavanian, and Prism will be building the apartments and the town and the retail spaces. They both have many years of experience in redevelopment throughout New Jersey and surrounding states. So this will be vital to other developments in the downtown, as well as the economic growth of our downtown district. In 2020, when I assumed office, we realized as a borough that we needed a municipal planner officially on board to help us with our redevelopment efforts and how we're going to envision the downtown and help us basically plan this path of redevelopment. So we appointed our municipal planner, GMR Architects, and again, they've been great. Unfortunately, in 2020, as we all know, in March through July of 2020, specifically in March, the world came to a halt because of COVID-19. And so through March and July, the impacts of COVID-19 had a significant impact on our Denellen Station project. It halted because state and county offices shut down, rarely working from home. And so the approvals that we needed to commence some of the projects, parts of the projects, stalled. It was hard to come across material, the fill for the land. So unfortunately, COVID-19 in 2020 really put us back on schedule for the overall project timeline. So again, keeping redevelopment in the future in mind, DMO Architects, together with the town, did create a community vision plan in 2020 for the downtown Denellen, and we issued it to the residents and business owners to understand what the community needs and wants were for the redevelopment of Denellen's downtown, so we could create a vision that was community oriented. So we fast forward to 2021. That community vision plan for Denellen's downtown results begin to be implemented to help guide us on amending our existing redevelopment plan. Some of the changes we made were unit size and building height, because our old redevelopment plan called for 20 per acre. We were seeing a lot of variances coming in for higher density, so this alleviated that. We did payment in lieu of parking, so developers who don't have enough parking have to pay the town for parking, so we can make it up down the road. EV parking spots, for every 25, the developer has to provide electronic vehicle parking. Maybe we'll touch on this more. And so these guidances, well, the survey took into consideration prior surveys too that we completed throughout the year since 2017 to help guide our decisions. So also in 2021, we saw the Denellen Station finally begin construction, and it's anticipated to be welcoming new residents in the summer of 2022, with a timeline of full completion of the project in 2023. They started leasing, and there's been a great reaction from the public. I believe they sold upward of 10 townhouses, so that's a good sign. So from all this, Denellen has seen an increase of interest of redevelopment and investment since 2020 and prior to, so I'm not saying 2020 is the only one, by small, mid, and larger developers to build within our redevelopment zones. And more projects will be presented in the near future. We just presented 2 conditional redevelopment agreements last night with the Triangle Garage. We extended the south side of the train station for a developer. So right now, I think we have 4 active conditional redevelopment agreements, which will be multi-use. One will be full residential, but this will all be revenue for the borough and help economic growth in our downtown. Also, by doing all this, there's been an interest from the state in terms of agencies such as the New Jersey TV and Motion Picture Commission, which has now listed Denellen as a town to promote to the film industry. And so if we are one of the towns that they choose, you can have 400 people in here at a given time that will be shopping in our downtown because they have to stay within the area in which they're filming. So let's do a look ahead real quick. So we're going to continue to build upon Denellen's current revitalization efforts in the downtown and the success that we've had by welcoming new investments in our central business district. And this will begin to spur more economic growth in our downtown. I'm going to come to the council and propose an amendment to the Denellen redevelopment plan to allow wineries, distilleries, and breweries throughout our redevelopment zone. This will assist in making our zoning laws more welcoming to a more diverse business portfolio and clientele. Our goal is to also finally finalize the sign ordinance so we can start enforcing a cohesive look in the downtown. And we'll start the plan to prepare for a master plan reexamination based upon the statutory break obligations we have to the new state of New Jersey. And this reexamination will entail a community approach to see how we all envision Denellen over the next decade. So with that, I'm going to introduce Gabe Baylor from DMR Architects, and he's going to discuss this topic with you.
Thank you, Mayor Salento. Good evening. My name is Gabe Baylor. It's a pleasure to be here talking to the public and all the representatives from the community here tonight. So I'm going to start as I'm a planner. Now, what is a planner in New Jersey? A lot of people don't understand what a planner is. A planner, specifically a land use planner, factors in on zoning. We look at zoning, we look at the permitted uses, we look at the bulk regulations, we look at the height, we look at the permitted uses within the zone. but we also craft redevelopment plans and master plans. And we are here tonight to talk about, as Mayor Salento talked about, the redevelopment plan and all things redevelopment. So a planner talks and also writes redevelopment plans. So we're here tonight to go over a planner's perspective of what how the redevelopment plan controls development in Denellen, but also guides and progresses and moves forward with the proper development at scale that promotes further development of Denellen. So a little background, Mayor Salento touched on several of these topics, but Denellen was a designated challenge to the village in 2012. The downtown redevelopment plan was drafted and the first draft was in 2016. Now, what this does, it's specific visions for larger sites. It creates a general vision for the North Avenue corridor, and it led to the Denellen Station redevelopment. As Mayor Salento mentioned as well, there are several other projects in place, and by seeing further development and development in Denellen, this attracts developers to come to Denellen to further initiatives of revitalization and redevelopment. In 2018, the North Transit Planning Authority and Together New Jersey adopted a transit hub study, and this was done. It was a grant that was funded by the Together New Jersey, and it involved a public survey. It generated a very comprehensive report. If no one's ever seen the report, it's a really, really comprehensive report about the vision, the community input, and also the direction. So we have these plans to help craft and guide development. So as Mayor Salento mentioned, that in 2020, DMR Architects, the firm which I work for, was retained by the borough. And the first thing we did was guiding a community vision plan. We did an online survey. Unfortunately, because of COVID, we could not do the community survey in person, but we did an online survey using SurveyMonkey. 437 people responded. And from this, we have better understanding of the community's preferences, provided community input, and also guide redevelopment. From this, we developed some redevelopment plan amendments. So an amendment, the redevelopment plan is the guide and the framework for development in Denellen. But amendments, you're able to make changes to the redevelopment plan. So from this feedback, we provided some redevelopment amendments, which I'll touch further. And also we helped further the pop-up park from Mayor Salento, who worked with the Borough Council and the Denellen Arts Commission, and really community input and community gathering to develop a pop-up park on Prospect Avenue, North Avenue. And as mentioned, public strategy for revitalization, it's an ongoing process. And that's why these community meetings are important, to hear back the feedback, to hear the understanding, and further to guide the development and direction for redevelopment in Denellen. This is the SurveyMonkey. It's an image of the survey. These are some of the questions. For example, what type of uses would we like to see in downtown? So we had over 25 questions, I believe. And from this, we got a good feedback in terms of the impression and the guidance direction from the community. So, what does the redevelopment plan mean? It creates a vision for the downtown. As Mayor Salento mentioned, there's 4 different sites. There's the North Side train station, the South Side train station, the Denellen station, which is our color, and the remaining parcels, North Avenue, primarily North Avenue for Plainfield, the Middlesex border. It promotes, spurs redevelopment, rehabilitation, and it guides and controls the development for the downtown. So you have zoning, but in this case, a redevelopment plan supersedes the zoning. The redevelopment plan determines what permitted uses are permitted there. It determines the architectural standards, that any development that comes in has to meet these architectural standards. It determines the building height. And also the redevelopment plan requires streetscape improvements. So all these new developments are going to, you're going to see improved streetscape elements along North Avenue or frontage and wherever the redevelopment plan is. It also requires parking. It makes the parking requirements and also minimum unit size for units. This is the map that Mayor Salento touched on. There's 4 different sites. The site 1 is on the north side of the train station. Site 2 is the south side of the train station. Site 3 is the Art Color site, and the remaining parcels are from the Plainfield to Middlesex border, primarily on North Avenue. So we're making progress. We did, based on community feedback and based on development, we made some redevelopment plan amendments. We required on-site parking for all new residential developments. Previously, new developments were able to, if they're under 20,000 square feet, were not required to provide on-site parking. So we made a requirement that all residential requires on-site parking. We did a payment in lieu of parking, and that stands for a pilot. So if a developer cannot provide on-site parking, a developer pays a fee for each parking spaces or leases the parking spaces in municipal private parking lot. So we want to make sure the developers that come here provide the required parking that supports the residential and the commercial. So we did the pilot to make sure that if they don't provide the required parking, the borough will receive a payment in lieu. And also we want to foresee for the future. We made a requirement for electric vehicle charging stations. As we're going to see more and more EV cars, we want to make sure that the borough has the necessary infrastructure to support these electric vehicles. This is some pictures from the pop-up park. It was really great to see that taking an underutilized parking lot and making it a public space. Having music there, having art there, having a community gathering space. So from the survey, 91% wanted to see a new public space. So the mayor and council listened to that recommendation and took the initiative in working with the community in developing this pop-up park. And I hope it comes back every year because I think it's been very successful and I like to see it further. I'm sure the borough and mayor and community like to see that as well.
Let's just interrupt real quick. We also highlighted several different businesses each Saturday at the events that were hosted.
And you also had ping pong. So having those type of activities really activates a space and brings people downtown. And from the people coming downtown, they support the local business. So we're making progress. Besides the Dunn Allen Station, there's smaller projects that have been approved. This one was approved by the planning board. It's 150 North Avenue. It was approved for 14 residential units with on-site parking. This one is for 390 North Avenue, the old Chicken Holiday building. There's site improvements to the site and facade improvements, and also there's going to be some outdoor dining. This other one was approved, was 440 North Avenue. This one is right next to the Quick Check, and this is for 9 residential units. So besides having the larger development, you have the smaller scale development along the North Avenue corridor, and this will supplement the larger scale, but also increase pedestrian movement, increase the population within downtown to support the businesses. So what does redevelopment mean? Redevelopment means a lot of things, but in my opinion, redevelopment means new residents support downtown businesses. It creates new businesses. All these new spaces, the 150 North Avenue has 2 commercial spaces. The 440 North Avenue has one commercial space. So it creates opportunities for new businesses to come. And they see these new attractive buildings and they want to locate in downtown Denali. It promotes continued redevelopment rehabilitation. Developers see the progress. They see the progress in downtown. They see the progress surrounding. It attracts further development. But the development is controlled by the redevelopment plan, so it has to meet the guidelines that's set forth in the redevelopment plan that was crafted with community input. in continued streetscape improvements. You'll see North Avenue and other redevelopment properties continue the streetscape improvements. It increases property value of downtown. It's been proven that more further development will increase property value. And from this, it will increase tax revenue for Dunell. But as mentioned, this is an ongoing process, and it will continue, but you have to continue with the goal and the strategy and the direction for the borough. So what's next for Dunell? We're going to, as Mayor mentioned, further appropriate redevelopment opportunities, the redevelopment that fits the scale of Dunell. There'll be continued growth, redevelopment, rehabilitation of downtown. There'll be increased tax rateables. There'll be improvements to Dunell in downtown. Positive branding. People see the growth. They see the growth. They hear about the growth. So this is the branding of downtown Dunell. And then, as Mayor mentioned also, there's upcoming amendments to prevent breweries, distilleries, wineries, and all redevelopment areas. And if prospective breweries see that it's permitted, this will attract these types of businesses there, because otherwise they don't know if it's permitted or not. So we're having these type of businesses, which have been proven to be successful in the downtown, they'll know that this will be attractive to locate hopefully in downtown Dunell. There's also going to be art and mural initiative that's ongoing with Rutgers and the Glaston School. And then there's going to be the master plan re-examination report, which is going to be community driven. So all this ties together into the development of Dunell and creates and crafts the right direction. So thank you for the mayor, thank you for the mayor council, and thank you for everyone here tonight. And I'm happy to be here and happy to be a part of this downtown development.
So before I introduce the next speakers, I want to touch on something that Gabe did note, which is revenue and rateables. And that's something that needs to be stressed for people who may have concerns over redevelopment in the downtown. Dunell's tax base is 85% based upon residential value. So that is a significant amount on the taxpayer. So by creating redevelopment in the downtown, that will be additional rateables and revenue into the town that will assist in alleviating property taxes on the residential component of our tax bracket. So it's an important point to make and to stress. So with that, I would like to introduce Charles Liebling of Wendell Morris Lane, and take a look.
Thanks, Mayor. Very happy to be here. I started working with the borough in 2015 on Art Color on the downtown redevelopment. You saw the timeline. I was lucky to come in where we actually were able to get to an agreement. And when I was here for the groundbreaking a couple months ago, it was a great moment just to finally see this get over the hump. And driving by and seeing the progress is great. And congratulations to everybody. Once a redevelopment plan is in place and a redeveloper wants to do a project, it's different than regular zoning. There's no kind of agreement in place when someone wants to just do something on their property. Because it's subject to a redevelopment plan, you enter into an agreement that keeps their feet to the fire, basically. The borough has adopted a plan. That means that they have seen a specific need to make something happen on these properties, and the agreement makes sure that happens. So I wanted to walk through with you the way a redevelopment agreement works, and you'll see, and I kind of noticed this myself as I was making notes. It makes sense. It's what you would want to require of a developer, and also what the town wants to see, and also because it is a partnership of sorts, facilitating for the redeveloper getting the project done, because that's the end goal. Is everybody wants to see this done. So I took as an example 150 North, which you saw the picture of, and went through that redevelopment agreement, and I figured I'd just kind of dissect it for you and tell you how they work. 150 North is an empty lot. For those of you who don't, have immediately in mind, it's an empty lot on the corner of Jackson Avenue across from Station Plaza. And it's a simple project, 1,500 square feet, approximately 14 residential units, 12 are market rate, 2 are affordable, as well as the ground floor commercial, which I mentioned. So first thing in a redevelopment agreement is, what is the project? And it describes that. This is what you're going to build. This is what we've agreed to. You've come in, you've shown us the picture. Okay, this is what you're going to build now. And you're going to get all the financing, and you're going to make all the improvements on the site and off site necessary to do it. And you're going to make an effort to then market the space and find tenants so that we've got an active thing here. Not a small portion is you're also going to pay the borough's costs, the costs that the borough incurs in hiring its professionals to make all this happen. And that's at the beginning of redevelopment. What's next? The schedule. You can't sit on this forever. You have to stick to a schedule that we've agreed to make this project happen. And there's a schedule, it's attached, and it says, here's when you're going to come in with a proposal, here's when you're going to go to the planning board, here's when you get all your approvals by, here's when you're going to get it the ground, here's when you're going to finish. And they need to stick to that, and the borough has enforcement remedies if it doesn't. But there's understanding in there too. There's a recognition that things can happen. A concept called force majeure, which is, there's a pandemic that everyone looked at their agreements to see if pandemic was in there when that befell us. Floods, strikes, things that can slow something down. So there's give and take there. And then if something like that happens, the redeveloper comes back to the town and say, hey, I'm having some trouble. Let's work out some changes here. And the agreement provides for that. Then when the project's done, they get a certificate of completion from the borough that says you've done everything you need to do. You're off the hook for this agreement. Now, it's a piece of private property. Project oversight. The borough reserves the right to oversee the project. So progress meetings, progress reports, all of which are mandated. Borough representatives can go onto the property, see what's going on, and make sure that the progress that's committed to is being made. There's a separate provision about infrastructure. Projects, especially in an older downtown, often need additional infrastructure to make them work. So that may mean sewer improvements, new road improvements, other types of utility, bringing cable, bringing additional water, whatever it might be. Those are all set forth and required of the redeveloper that they do that. There's a provision about approvals. Some projects are a simple approval. It's a trip to the planning board. Others, like Art Color, have a zillion approvals, and they need to list what all those are and keep the borough apprised of how those are being obtained. There is a commitment about financing, that the redeveloper is capable of obtaining financing, that they're going to do everything they need to do to get the financing for the project and pay all those costs, including the borough ones that we spoke about. There are protections in place for the lender because there's the recognition that a developer is going to go get a bank loan, and a lender needs to be confident that if things go wrong, they will be able to recoup their loan. So the borough acknowledges that if there's a default and a foreclosure, the bank has the opportunity to come in, find another developer to take their place, and that the borough will hold off on exercising its remedies while the bank is doing that. Otherwise, can't get a loan, and the project doesn't proceed. So that's standard and works well. And fortunately, it's needed rarely. Because part of the process also between the plan and this is making sure that the redeveloper is capable of carrying out the project. The redeveloper has a bunch of what are called covenants that they agree to as well, that they're going to remediate the property if needed, that they're not going to stop work, they're not going to discontinue their performance. They can't sell the property while it's being done. They can't bring in someone else. We've picked you. We've signed an agreement with you. You can't just now go out and give it to someone else. We trust you. You'll let us know if there's any change in your financial condition. You'll properly supervise. You'll limit your impact on the neighborhood. You'll control the impact on traffic. You'll watch out for pests and, animal infestation, light, noise. You'll keep the site maintained, and all these are requirements that are imposed on the redeveloper. The other piece that that's my legal colleague Sandy Galicia will get to, that was relevant to this one was the affordable housing piece, and Denellen does have an affordable housing obligation, and that is being passed through to developers to include affordable housing in their projects so that Denellen can meet its obligations under its settlement agreement. Developers are required to carry all kinds of insurance. They required to indemnify the borough for any claims that might be brought against the borough that arise out of the project. So somebody falls, the person who falls says, okay, I'm going to sue the guy whose project this is, and also the borough, because they have a redevelopment agreement. That's now the burden of the developers. It's not a borough responsibility. Defaults can and do happen, and we saw that there have some, early in the art color process, agreements weren't reached. That can be for just not building the project. That could be for violating the schedule. That could be for trying to sell the property to somebody else, bankruptcy, other misrepresentations, and the borough has its remedies. They can terminate the agreement, which is what usually happens. They can go to court and require the redeveloper to perform if it's something they haven't done. And there's also the opportunity to seek damages if the borough has suffered damages resulting from the default of the redeveloper. So that's basically the guts of a redevelopment agreement. This redevelopment agreement also has a First Amendment associated with it, which is going before the council, I believe, next month. And that's related to community benefits, which is another concept. In addition to the redevelopment project itself, which is intended to have broad overall benefits by bringing blighted property back into productive use, there's also just the concept of something specific that the redeveloper does for the community. And for this project, there is a monetary contribution being made towards the cost of pedestrian crossings, most particularly because of the location of this development and the shopping center. That's something that they have agreed to. So that's an amendment to this agreement that will be considered by council next month. Any questions?
Well, if we're okay, we wait for that.
Absolutely, okay.
Everybody hold their questions till the end. We'll leave about 15, 20 minutes for questions.
Okay, thank you. Thanks.
Next up, we have Mr. Sandy Galicia of Wendell Mark Lane as well. This speaks about affordable housing.
Okay, thank you. Sandy Galicia from Wendell's Marks Lane in Middendorf. I'm also happy to be here. tonight. I've been working with Chuck for several years on the Dunellen redevelopment projects, and we're really enjoying this work for you. As Chuck touched on in the redevelopment agreement, it has a section that sets forth the redevelopers' obligations with respect to creating affordable housing as part of their project. As I'll talk about in a little bit, the redevelopment plan has required set-asides for affordable housing, depending on whether it's a for sale or a rental residential project. And those obligations are channeled to each developer through the redevelopment agreement to identify the specific number of units that this project is suspected to produce. The obligations based on the number of units that are being built overall by the developer, and there's a certain percentage of those units that have to be affordable. The redevelopment agreement also includes an obligation for the redeveloper to comply with all the applicable affordable housing regulations, including the uniform housing affordability controls, which are state regulations. They address how much rents can be charged for affordable units, how many bedrooms have to be created, and things like that. Go back. There we go. Right, to the left. The left is forward. Okay. It's upside down now, to the right. The agreement also sets forth for the redeveloper the duration of the affordability controls. So under the state regulations, the units are required to be affordable for at least 30 years. And that obligation is set forth in a deed restriction that's filed against those particular units, so that if when the units change hands, a new tenant comes in that's an affordable tenant, it can only be rented to an affordable tenant. It can't be rented to a market rate tenant during that 30-year period. If it's a for sale unit, that's the same restriction. You can only sell it to someone who's qualified for the affordability controls, not to someone who can afford a regular market rate house. The agreement sets forth that there will be an administrative agent that enforces the affordability regulations. That can be either the borough can do that itself. The borough can hire a third party who specializes in that to administer the units, or they can appoint the redeveloper themselves to do it. There are certain state controls that govern the approval of who's going to be the administrative unit or the administrative agent. And those are all set forth in the redevelopment. There we go. So the borough has a constitutional obligation under the Mount Laurel cases to zone for affordable housing within the borough. That doesn't mean the borough has to create the units themselves. They just have to, through their zoning ordinances, allow for the construction of a required number of units within the borough. The borough received approval in 2016 from the New Jersey Superior Court for its current affordable housing plan, which establishes that zoning, certain code provisions related to the provision of affordable housing that the court agreed will yield, or has the potential to yield, the required number of units that Dunellen has. That obligation for the borough was determined to be 118 affordable units. Now, 58 of those units are being created at the Dunellen Station project, as the mayor initially indicated. That's currently under construction. All of those affordable units will be rental units in the apartment part of the project. There's also another project that was approved and I believe completed at 364 to 368 North Avenue. that yielded 2 affordable units. Therefore, the borough's unmet need is 53 affordable units, and I know the math doesn't work out correctly because there are certain bonuses that the borough was entitled to based on the units provided. So the determined unmet need in the Superior Court case is 53 affordable units. So what the borough decided to do in its zoning was allow for those units to be created within the redevelopment area, the downtown redevelopment area. So the obligation to create those units on redevelopers is set forth in the redevelopment plan. So the redevelopment plan requires a minimum of 15% of any new rental residential units created within the redevelopment area must be affordable units. That bumps up to a minimum of 20% set aside for sale residential units. 20% of those must be affordable units. There are current projects underway within the area number 4. As we already mentioned, 150 North Avenue. There are 2 affordable units that are expected to be produced in that project. 528 North Avenue with 6 affordable units. 740 Meadowbrook Road with 3 affordable units. And 440 North Avenue with 1 affordable unit. As I indicated, affordable units are deed restricted for a minimum of 30 years. At the expiration of that 30-year period, the borough can elect to have that restriction continue, or it can release those units from the restriction. However, if it releases those units, it would have to find other units somewhere else within the borough to meet that obligation. So the expectation is municipalities will keep those restrictions in place. Now, what does affordable mean? Each year, the affordable housing professionals in New Jersey prepare a chart that lists the income limits for the different regions of New Jersey. They identify what the median, the moderate, low, and very low income will be for each region. Denellen is in what's called region number 3. That consists of Middlesex, Somerset, and Hunterdon counties. I put up an example on the screen for moderate income households. That means an annual income of more than $55,440, but less than $88,704. Right, so that is the maximum income that you can have for affordable housing is $88,704. That's for a 3-person household. Low-income households is $55,440 or less, and very low income is $33,264 or less. Now, the chart is prepared for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 person households. So the median income varies depending on how big the household is. Under the regulations and the settlement agreement that the borough entered into with Fair Share Housing Center in connection with the affordable housing litigation, 13% of units have to be affordable to very low income household units. And at least 50% of the units have to be affordable to low or very low income households. And that's percentages of the affordable units themselves, not of the overall project's market units. Now, each municipality is required to have a municipal affordable housing program. Mr. Robbins, the borough clerk, and the borough administrator is designated as the municipal housing liaison. He is the liaison between the developers and the township and other entities that are involved in the creation of affordable housing. He would work with the administrative agent in administering the units. The administrative agent is either appointed by the borough through a contract, or it could be the developer itself, or it could be the borough itself. The administrative agent will take in applications from prospective tenants or purchasers of affordable units. They will do the income qualification to determine whether the person is eligible to have affordable housing. They will monitor the units to make sure that affordable persons are still occupying the unit. They will take care of the retirement of affordable units at the expiration. If the affordability controls expire, they will handle that and removal of the restrictions. The cost of the administrative agent under the borough ordinance and the contemplation of the state regulations is to be paid for by the developer or the owner of the property. Okay, so that's not a borough. It should not be a borough cost. Any person interested, the borough is also developing an affordable housing marketing program that'll be done in conjunction with each redeveloper. That involves advertising, publishing in the newspaper that, hey, there are 10 available units in Dunellen. We'd like to have people apply for them so that it gets the word out there. It also reaches out to certain community groups to let them know that there are affordable units available. Any person interested in renting affordable housing in the borough can submit an application or an inquiry to Mr. Robbins through the borough's website. I placed the link where that information is available on the slide. Okay, that's my presentation. Thank you, Aaron.
Up next, we have Daniel Ware, DW Financial, he's our financial advisor, and he'll be discussing about municipality, the impact of schools, and how it pertains to redevelopment pilots.
Thank you, Jeff. Yeah, thank you, Mayor. Good evening. Myself, my firm has been working with since the art color site got started, and I'm glad to be here and really see the progress that's going on in the community. When developers come into communities like Dunellen, they are typically the big developers come in, and they're armed with professionals on their side that help them run through specific performers and models that they go through to create what they believe is the most optimum financial project for themselves. And because of that, it's important for communities like Dunellen and others to have firms like ours. And what we do and what we provide is the same type of financial expertise, but on the borough side. And it's important because, of course, the developers are looking to try and get as good an edge as they can financially. And we're looking to try and make sure that they do well, but then the borough is protected, at the same time. I always look at it almost like a marriage. We enter into long-term financial agreements and redevelopment agreements with developers. We're in it together. So we do want the developers to make money. Of course, the more that they succeed, the more investment and the better the project is. But we also want the borough to succeed as well financially. And we'll get into a little bit about pilots and how we negotiate pilots, which are payments in lieu of taxes. In a minute, but one of the things that we try to create is to balance the revenue coming in from the developers on their site specifics with the costs that the municipalities are going to incur. And the costs really are the municipal costs of having to service now X number of new residents, and the costs to the schools on the potential new public school children that are coming into the system. And it's actually probably the most heated conversations we have as we go through this all the time. What's the impact on schools? Even in the New Jersey studies that have been done by the Rutgers Blaustein School and Professor Stoken, it says right in there, it's one of the biggest misconceptions, especially with transit-oriented developments. There's always a big discussion about how all these new units are going to come in, and we're going to flood our schools, and the costs are going to go way up, our taxes are going to go way up. And in truth, that is actually not what happens, especially with transit-oriented development. developments. And I think you'll see as more of these transit-oriented developments are being built, a lot of that is the size of the units are very small. So you're seeing, one bedrooms at 650 square feet, two bedrooms at, 800, 900 square feet. We're not talking about, building single family homes where people are going to bring in large families and large students. So with that being said, a little small thing we can read it. So what we try to do is we've created a database ourselves at our firm with a lot of the developments that have occurred in North Jersey, and to see how many school children come out of each of the developments. And the purpose of that is to apply multipliers to the number of units that are coming in, both school children and residents. But the best way to go about doing that, which really has the backing of the professionals at the state level, is using the studies that have been done through Rutgers. There was a study that was done, I think it was 2006, was the first major one that was done that really looked at multipliers, how many school students are coming out of these developments. That was actually just updated in 2018, and it changed a lot of it. They actually brought down the multipliers because they were too high after doing all the research over the last 12 years, that there actually weren't as many school students coming out of these transit-oriented developments. Actually, all of the developments, but mostly the transit-oriented developments. And so they went back and they redid the whole study and came up with new multipliers. And that's both for new residents and for school children. And then what we do is we look at the new developments that are coming here, we apply the multipliers to those, and then we apply a cost to both new residents and to new school students. And of course, at the end, as we negotiate with developers on what we're going to require them and asking them for pilot payments, we obviously need to not only make sure we're covering our costs, which we're going to show you how we get to that point, but also adding additional funding to the municipality, whether it's for new projects, offset budget costs, and things like that. So you have to create the multipliers, apply them to the number of units, and then come up with a cost for each of the new school students or from the municipal budget. So this is, I just came, did not use a specific project here in the Netherlands, so that's only to numbers as you apply these to a project, but these are the multipliers that are currently being used in the Rutgers studies that have come out of the state. So the persons, I'm sorry, I forgot that. Right now. So as you can see, for persons, for new residents, for studios and one bedrooms, 1.551 per unit, two bedrooms, 2.355, three bedrooms, 3.289. And applying that to a 50-unit building, in town, you would get approximately 95 new residents in town. You do the same thing with the multipliers for the school children. Studios and one bedrooms, 0.004, two bedrooms, 0.065, and three bedrooms, 0.245. That's the number of school children per unit. So in this 50-unit building, we're really only talking about two new school students. And for that has played out accurately among the projects that have been built in North Jersey. I'll go through a couple of examples of it. And this is, as you can see for the bottom, these are for market rate units. So the original 2006 study that Rutgers did have these multipliers for school students for affordable projects. And I will give you those numbers as well. The new study actually took the affordable multipliers out because it varied more than they had enough information to really keep them in the study. But I'll just go through it here because I wrote them down in the old study. And we had actually gone through this exercise for the Art Polar project when that first came on board. So the affordable projects for one bedrooms, for example, the multiplier is 0.14. If 2 bedrooms, it's 0.62, and 3 bedrooms, it's 1.27. That's the new school students. Again, that was taken out of the new study, but that's what was in the original study. This, again, is based on market building. So let's talk about municipal costs. There's a model that the state has created down at the Division of Local Government Services that is used by a lot of people to evaluate the net cost to the municipality. It's called the PFAF, the Pilot Financial Agreement Forecast. And what it does is it goes through certain parts of your municipal budget that can be affected by new residents coming on board. And because it's not, your entire budget doesn't change just by having a new, X number of people coming in from a residential project. So what are the public works, certain health and human services, landfill, solid waste disposal, public safety, obviously police, courts, public defenders. So they have gone through that budget, that New Jersey municipal budget, and they apply percentages of those department costs to new residents. So for example, here, that actually was calculated at $165 for a new resident. The impact on your budget is $165 per person. So in this particular example, the 95 new people at $165 would cost the borough $15,675 in their budget. Of course, this is not exact science work here. So you try to use this as a guide as you are negotiating with developers and what you expect to receive from them from a revenue standpoint. And of course, you really have to make sure we're covering this cost at the minimum. We obviously want it to be much more. But for 50 unit new building, $15,675 of new residential costs to the municipal budget. The school costs is a little different. It's another one of those items that becomes probably the biggest conversation you have when you're talking with communities and what are the impacts on schools. This analysis that I'm going to walk you through for the new school students assumes that we don't have to build a new school. This is where we have the infrastructure to be able to take on the new students that are coming on board. The Dunnell in 2021-2022 budget for the Board of Ed lists the classroom instruction cost for a student at $8,381. And that is the cost of classroom instruction. It's not, when you look at the budget and you divide it by the number of students, that's not $8,381. That's more, but you're talking about capital costs, debt service, and other items that are not affected by a student within the classroom. So you have to take out, and that designation is not one that we do as an analysis. That designation comes from the state. It's part of the budget that shows you what the cost of classroom instruction for a student in Dunnell is. The actual revenues from, so where I go from the 8,381, then what we do is we look at how much of your school budget is funded from local revenues. Your entire budget is not funded through taxes. You have a portion of your budget funded by local taxes and a portion of your school budget funded from other revenue sources, including the state. In this particular case, the Nellens budget, 61% of it comes from local taxes. So what we do is we take the cost of the classroom instruction, we multiply it by how much of that is borne by the taxpayers in development, and we get 5,166. That's the cost to the taxpayer for a new student in Borough of Denell. And so what we'll do, right, is we'll apply that $5,166 to each new school student that is projected to come out of development, and we get $10,332 in this particular example. And then that's building the report and the model that we will eventually, as financial advisors, come to this team here and base our recommendations on what we believe is what the developer can afford to pay us, so that they're still making their returns, but they're covering our costs and actually getting a lot more for the borough. But it's important to know what the base cost is, and it becomes an issue, a contended issue all the time. And the other thing about schools, as you will understand, is their budgets are always fully funded, at 100%. So they're never, schools like to think that they like to say that they're losing money, but they're never really losing money. There may be additional costs for the new students, but as you can see, we're making sure we're covering that with the new development. So obviously, in the next slide, the combination is for this 50-unit building, the new costs are $26,000 on the taxpayers of Denell. We're going to go through with Matthew the pilots and agreements and how we get there, payments of taxes and percentages of gross revenue. But just to complete the conversation, we look at the unit mix, we look at the rents that they can afford in Denell, what are the rents that they'll be getting, and an annual rent. So in this particular case, this example, a 50-unit building might produce a little over $1 million in revenue. Then what we end up negotiating with the developer is a percentage of that revenue as a pilot. Whereas typically you would have regular taxes, right, on any typical residential building or residential house. In this particular case, in order for developers to be successful financially, they cannot build a building and pay conventional taxes. When I said they can't, that's part of the test that we all have to come up with. If the law actually has what they refer to as a but-for test. If the developer was to pay regular taxes based on the project that they are creating, and it is not a financially successful, they can't do it, they wouldn't do it, then that's when you can start to negotiate a pilot, some other way of bringing in revenue. So they're still paying, it's not a tax, it's called a pilot. And so what we do in this particular case, for example, this 50-unit building would produce at 10% of gross revenues, they would pay a pilot of $97,000. In some cases, we net out land taxes as a part of that. So the county would get their share, the school would get the share, and the town would get a share. There's an administration fee. So out of the $97,000 in this particular case, the borough share would be $83,000. And obviously the $83,000, that was the first year, we had the cost of $26,000 based on the residents and the schools. So the net benefit of the town would be $57,000 in year one. And we run that out for the 30 years. So the net benefit after costs for a 50-unit building is $2.7 million over 30 years. And again, there's a lot in there, and I know we're going through it relatively quickly, and this is a big issue, but the idea of this whole exercise is to build a report and a memo that we can provide to the administration that will help them guide whether or not this is a pilot that makes sense to provide for the developers, or it's not enough, we need to add more. In many cases, the developers want to start at the lowest that they can, 10%, and then we start to build on top of that. And then you end up eventually getting to a point where there's a balance between what the developers' returns are. As I stated in the beginning, you want them to make money. They're investing big dollars into these projects. but you also want to make sure there's a benefit to the municipality. And this is how you build that exercise out. So there's a lot in gross revenues and pilots that Matt's going to talk about. So we'll kind of get back to that, but that's the school and municipal impact costs.
Okay,
So thank you very much.
Next up, we have Matthew Jessup, Esquire, for the Women's Scotland Endowment LLC, and he's going to discuss annual service charges, or commonly known as pilots, and redevelopment bonds, if you're not correct. So,
Thank you, Mayor, I appreciate it. Before I begin, two things. One, I want to thank Dan for interrupting what would have been 3 lawyers talking for about 45 minutes. It sounds more like medical torture than a good way to spend your Wednesday evening. And two, doing seminars like this for a really long time, I long ago learned that when you go fast, finish early to get everybody out. So I will try to get through this as quickly as possible. Dan actually touched on a couple of things early in these slides. I'll go through them real quick. You see the term annual service charge. We also talk about pilot. We actually more often, I think, use the word pilot, which stands for payment in lieu of tax. Instead of the developer paying a conventional tax bill like we all pay on our homes, they make a statutory payment in lieu of that tax. The reason you also see annual service charge is because I hope you're going to have to read the statute, but if you do read the law, it's actually referred to in the law as an annual service charge and not a pilot. Again, it places the conventional tax on the improvements in every circumstance, and in certain circumstances on the land as well. So if you look at your own tax bill, you see a land assessed value, improvement assessed value, and you've got a tax on each that's combined, and that's the bill you get. With a redevelopment project, in certain circumstances, they'll still pay the land tax, but they'll pay a pilot on the improvement. And in other circumstances, they'll pay the pilot on both the land and the improvement. And pilots are used up and down the state, throughout New Jersey. Some often think of a pilot as a tool used in urban environments, in communities that have lower incomes in other municipalities. I think this whole team has done pilot projects in every type of community, urban, suburban, rural, from what you consider the AAA rated economic municipalities in New Jersey and down. These are really used statewide. Dan mentioned the but-for test. Here it is. Pilots are a great tool, but we can't just use them whenever we want. We do have to first prove statutorily that but for the pilot, the redevelopment project would not be built. So as you'll see in a minute, Dan's firm will come in and basically look at the project, look at what it would pay in conventional taxes, and say either can or can't afford the conventional taxes. If it can't afford to pay those conventional taxes as it's built, then we can go ahead and look on a pilot. So who can pay the annual service charge? An entity called an urban renewal entity. This is really a creation by the developer. They have to file themselves as an urban renewal entity with the state. What it really means is that they are limited profit entity. So again, as Dan talked about earlier, we want our developer to make a good return, but we don't want them retiring off a single project. And the long-term tax exemption law sort of takes care of this by limiting the amount of profit this urban renewal entity can make. And anybody can really pay a pilot. So if you are the developer of an apartment complex, you own that development, you're paying the tax bill. So in this case, you're paying the pilot bill. You're of course getting that revenue from rents, but the actual tenants renting the building they're paying rent. They're not paying the pilot directly. But if you have a pilot on a for sale project, a condo project, then one of us as an individual purchaser does not have to be an urban renewal entity, right? We can then pay the pilot ourselves in lieu of our tax bill. Again, the amount of the profit is restricted by law.
And under the statute, any excess profits, are actually paid by the developer over to the municipality. Raise your hands if you've ever seen that in this group. I mean, it never happens, right? The developer always stays within their excess profit limitations. And if they're dangerously close, I suspect they fire their accountant and they figure out how to make it work otherwise. I think importantly, the urban renewal entity cannot file a tax appeal on their project while they're paying the annual service charge. So, and that's largely because, as Dan showed earlier with those percentages, that their pilot number is already going to ebb and flow with the success of the project. So if the project is not as successful, arguably the project is not worth as much, but they're also already paying less because they're typically paying a percentage of their income. But I think it's important that when you partner with a developer, you work really hard, as Chuck mentioned earlier, through a redevelopment agreement. Stan mentioned you're sort of 30-year partners. You don't have somebody that turns around a year later and sues the town and says, I want my excess lower, right? It doesn't really feel like we're in the spirit of being partners. So I do think that's important. The urban renewal entity can opt out of paying a pilot after a year in most circumstances and go back to paying conventional taxes. Of course, go back a couple of minutes, if they couldn't afford to do that in the first place, why would they do that now? If there are redevelopment bonds issued to fund a portion of the project and infrastructure, and we're going to talk about that in a minute, then they can't, because those pilots essentially, or a portion of those pilots are earmarked to take that service on bonds. So we can't just lose that debt service, a year or 2 years, however many years in. The process to get the pilot, the developer has to submit a written application. There are a host of content requirements, importantly, including a fiscal plan that Dan and his team can evaluate, architectural and site plans so that the planning team and the engineering team at the borough can evaluate. We can all understand exactly what's being built, how it's being paid for, what the cash flows and the project financials look for. From there, the mayor actually is the one charged at first with reviewing the application and then making a recommendation to the governing body. The governing body can then, by resolution of the law, approve the application, but then the financial agreement, which is the document that memorializes the terms of the pilot, has to be approved by ordinance. So we often just do those things at one time by ordinance. The financial agreement, again, is the document, similar to the redevelopment agreement Chuck referenced earlier. Financial agreement is between the borough and the developer, and it memorializes all the terms of the annual service charge. So how much is the developer paying in a pilot? Establishing and confirming that there are limitations on their profits. Again, confirming that we're exempting the improvements from conventional tax, that we're also exempting the land from conventional tax if appropriate. And as Dan mentioned in his pro forma, the municipality typically charges an administrative fee, right? So we want to document that and contractually require the administrative fee. We want to determine the term of the financial agreement and other key components. And this is the most key component, right? What is the pilot example be? How is it computed? Typically, pilots are either a percentage of their annual gross revenue, so total revenue from the project, rents, parking fees, storage fees, pet fees. If anybody's rented in an apartment complex, you know that the owner can tack on a whole host of fees. All of those fees are income to the developer. We care about the gross income when it comes to setting a pilot limit. So the fact that their expenses may be higher because they're not as good at managing a project as others doesn't adversely impact the amount that the municipality is going to get paid. If it is a percentage of annual gross revenue, then the minimum number is 10% in, again, most conventional circumstances. And I think in Dan's scenario, we saw it started at 10% of the annual service charge. That number can go up. It can be 11, it can be 12, it can be 13, and that's really where Dan comes in and says the right number is 10 for 10 years, 11 for 10 years, and 12 for the last 10 years or some component. Pilots can also be a percentage of the total project cost. So we just look to what it costs to build initially. We don't look to how much revenue the project is making down the road. There, the minimum would be 2% of project costs. We really generally see those more in hotel projects and maybe grocery projects, but not on the typical apartment complex, townhome complex, or mixed-use residential over a bottom floor retail component. Of every pilot dollar that gets paid by a developer, the municipality keeps 95 cents of that, and the other 5 cents goes to the county. So unlike a traditional tax dollar, like the ones we all pay, where the borough probably collects 20 cents per tax dollar or so.
6%.
26%, okay, so about a quarter of the tax dollar goes to the borough, an amount goes to the county, an amount goes to the board of ed, the school, the fire district, the library, on and on. This is a lot simpler, and as you can tell, weighted a lot more for the benefit of the municipality. 95 cents to the municipality, 5 cents to the county. We can do a pilot for basically 30 years. The term of the financial agreement can be longer, but the amount of time that the developer is going to pay that pilot is going to be for a period of 30 years. Can be less, but again, typical projects we see are 30 years. So this is sort of an example of how we evaluate the but-for test and arrive at a conclusion of what we should charge a pilot in what is a residential project. So sort of dangerous when lawyers do that, dangerous when I try to take Dan's job here, but so Dan can jump in and correct me if I'm wrong. But essentially what this shows is if this project that cost about $56.5 million to construct, if it were conventionally taxed, it would have a market value upon completion of $45 million. So is a developer going to spend $56 million to build something that on day one, when it's newest and at its best, is only worth $45 million? No, right? There's an $11 million shortfall. Not only will they not do it, the bank won't give them the money to build it in the first place. So now we know that if we do pay conventional taxes, the project's never going to get built. So what do we end up doing? We end up looking at what the tax bill could be that provides the developer with the return that they're looking for and gets the value upon completion of the project to be equal to the cost of construction. And ironically, in this case, we still couldn't get it to 10% of the annual service charge. It was more like 7.7% of the annual service charge. And the developer nonetheless agreed basically to make a slightly lesser than what Denver Public calls standard return and pay a 10% annual service charge. But if you run through this math and determine that that number is rightly 11% of annual service charge, that's how we sort of get to that conclusion that the developer should pay 11% of the annual gross revenue as an annual service charge. So compare the two scenarios. In a conventional tax scenario on that same project, again, really it never gets built. But the hypothetical of if it were to get built and it were to pay conventional taxes, it would pay about $973,000. The municipality, in this hypothetical, gets 17%. So they collect $171,000. But in a pilot at 10%, the developer now pays half of what he or she would have paid. That's critical because that's how they can afford to build the project. If we don't cut that down, this project never gets built. But because the municipality gets 95%, the municipality is now getting over $400,000 in total tax revenue. So a significant increase in revenue to the municipality, as Dan pointed out earlier, without adversely impacting the borough's budget, without adversely impacting the school district, which are both important, and while ensuring that the project actually gets built in the first place. Again, I think I just kind of went through the reasons why we need the pilot, right? The project gets done, the municipality gets more money, and not only do we make sure the school district is allocated but there is an ability through shared services to additionally cover school costs if that's necessary. All while, as everyone else has mentioned, the project height, density, affordable housing, all of the requirements of the municipality are being met through the redevelopment process instead of through the straight zoning process where you might not have quite as much control. Okay, I don't know what I did. So we'll go here. Okay, so we have a project, we have a pilot, which means we have a revenue stream. There are certain circumstances where we also may want to, the borough may want to issue bonds, long-term financial instruments, to fund a portion of either the redevelopment project itself, associated off-site infrastructure in connection with the project. There may be additional water and sewer infrastructure upgrades that are necessary in order to support the new project. There may be environmental remediation at the site that simply causes that project to be more expensive than a traditional project that had clean soil would be. And so we have a couple of different options as to how the municipality can get involved and issue long-term debt to help fund those extra project costs that might not be come along with a traditional project. So there's a couple choices. You can issue general obligation bonds pursuant to the local bond law. That's the same mechanism Denellen uses to issue bonds to fund road improvements and park improvements and upgrading playgrounds and things like that. That Scott is also certainly familiar with. There's an ability to issue revenue-backed bonds that are secured by various revenues that are produced by the project. We don't see that very often. And then redevelopment area bonds, which we see certainly quite often, bonds that are secured by those pilot payments or a portion of those pilot payments that the developers pay to the municipality. One of the benefits of issuing bonds under one of these methods is instead of that 10% of annual service charge or 2% of total project cost pilot, we can negotiate and set the pilot amount to a number that we and the developer collectively want. So there's a little more flexibility to get to a pilot number that works for everybody. General obligation bonds, there are some benefits to issuing those. They are secured by the ad valorem tax empowered municipality, which is, potentially a risk the municipality takes. If the project fails, if the revenues aren't sufficient, it's the municipal budget that picks up the debt service. So we don't see these very often, but they are cheaper to issue. And if the scenario is one where the pilot number is set, the bonds have to be paid and the borough keeps the difference, well, then the borough has an incentive to get that bond debt service as low as possible because then they keep more pilot dollars. But I think the biggest con to this general obligation bonds is that payment risk. Essentially, the borough is guaranteeing the debt service on those bonds. Revenue-backed bonds, not necessarily secured by the municipality, secured typically by revenues of the project, such as loan repayments. We don't see these very often. Interest rate tends to be very high. The only revenues you really tend to see are securitized are pilots, and that's the scenario here. So with a revenue redevelopment area bond or a RAD bond, the bonds are typically secured solely by the pilot or a special assessment, which we didn't talk about tonight. Typically a pilot. They are not typically also secured by the municipality. So the bondholder, if there's a failure to make a pilot payment, the bondholder's sole recourse is to look to the project and try and enforce any remedies they have against the project. They can't come to the borough, they can't come to the CFO, the mayor, the borough council, and ask them to step in financially and help. There's no obligation there. As a result, there's a little bit of a higher risk to that bondholder, so the interest rate does tend to be a little bit higher. The world of bondholders who are willing to buy a bond like that are not quite as broad as ones that would buy a general obligation bond of the municipality. And as a result, those bonds are typically bought by the developer, an affiliate of the developer, or the developer's construction lender, who already is making a loan, probably 70% of the project cost to fund. So they'll make the additional loan and have it secured by these bonds. The key to the security for these bonds is in any circumstance where there's a pilot, a failure by the developer to pay the pilot is akin to a failure of any of us to pay our real estate taxes. That creates a lien, that's an enforceable lien. It trumps almost all other liens existing on the property, including our mortgages, right? So the municipality has the ability ultimately to sell our property and they get paid before our mortgage lender gets paid. That security exists on these pilot bonds as well. And so that makes a mortgage lender to the project nervous, because if there are bonds out there and they're not bought by the construction lender, and there's a failure to make that pilot payment, they might lose the collateral on their loan. And we have seen projects paid for by RABs that sat vacant for 4, 5, 6 years. And the construction bank, the construction lender, the mortgage lender made every single pilot payment every single quarter, because there's no way they're going to let the lien of the bonds trump their mortgage and replace their security. And that's really the beauty of this instrument relative to the redevelopment law. So, and the last thing I'll say, typically we see these bonds issued when we have a project cost of 50 million, the developer can get 45 million, but they just can't get the last 5 million. So in order to complete that capital stack and get the project off the ground, RABs are a great way to come in and fund that last $5 million piece. So now we have all $50 million. We have a mortgage loan, we have equity from the developer, and we have the RAB to make the deal work and get our project built.
We'll open up the floor to the public, those who are present, those who are on by dial-in, who ask any questions to any of our speakers on the panel. So, any questions from the public? Mr. Robbins?
Chuck, the borough has a ramp on the Denellen stations.
Correct.
It has not been acted on yet. But then I'm going to expand it because we've got our teams up there. Then we got the number for the pilot number. We took that into consideration the future that whenever it kicks in, we actually sell them. So we have, I don't know the numbers, whether I was 10 or 11, but percentage of that is accounted.
Correct. So when we negotiated that color study, we ended with a pilot amount. I'm going to, it's pretty close, but I'll say when at stabilization, approximately $1.5 million a year in pilot payments from the developer, of which I think we maxed out at 700,000 of the $1.5 million was going to be used to pay off the RAB bond, and the remaining 800,000 a year, increasing, by the way, as rents increase, would come solely to the borough. And then, in fact, as I mentioned before, with school costs and municipal costs, we actually, in that particular contract agreement, we put a minimum pilot that covered amounts for the school students that we estimated coming in and the municipal costs that were coming in. So the net number to the borough far exceeds the costs, but it would never go below, no matter what the rents do. The pilot would never go below what it costs the borough in municipal costs and school costs. And that was something that we had made sure was in that agreement. But yes, to your point, the pilot in that one covers debt service on the RAB bonds plus the net to the town.
I have an additional question for Sandy. Sandy, on the affordable housing, I think I heard you say that for owner residential units, houses, is there an obligation of 20% of new houses to the affordable housing unit, I understand.
Yeah, it's only new residential units in the redevelopment area. If there are for sale units, then 20% of the for sale units have to be affordable.
Okay, under the demonstration, it doesn't appear to be there. So I'll come back and ask, why wasn't that, or how did that happen, that the for sale units did not have an affordable housing?
That was part of the settlement of the declaratory judgment action that approved Dunellen's affordable housing plan. So that site was identified then during that lawsuit as one that was going to yield units. And they were part of the settlement with Fair Share Housing was that those 58 units generated would be all rent units and
Yeah, I was actually in the courtroom, John Porter presented all of this, and it worked. Hallucination made me remember that this is what happened.
Sure. So if there's a new project that, that has, 10 for sale units within the redevelopment area, 2 of those would have to be.
Thanks.
Thank you, sir. July?
Yeah, was there a redevelopment plan that was approved or a redevelopment plan with that property on Boundbrook Road, North Avenue, where you had the fire? Because now it's a for lease. I thought that project was ready to go, was approved and everything like that, and now I see for lease.
There is a redevelopment agreement and financial agreement for 528 North Avenue. It's the Cat's property. I'll let Mr. Lieber speak to that more directly.
Yeah, the most current development with that, well, the redeveloper has not performed as required. And the most recent development that was a request to convey the property to a new redeveloper. The owner of property is a physician, not a developer, which shows, don't try this at home. It's not that easy. And hopefully this, the borough is reviewing the proposal to identify this new developer as someone who actually could perform and, that hopefully we see progress on that site.
Thank you.
Okay.
Okay. Any other questions?
Yeah, in terms of the homes that are for sale, that are those that are rental property, that does not become part of the borough's rent. In other words, I buy a home, okay, and do I not pay taxes on that real estate?
If it's a redevelopment project that has a pilot,
Correct.
then you would not pay taxes, you would pay the
Assessment fee from the.
that's set forth in the pilot.
Okay, and then that, so basically, as a new homeowner in that particular project, I'm not paying real estate taxes, I'm paying the developer taxes, in a sense, the taxes, or
It's a for sale concept, right?
For
The
sale.
developer built it, but then he or she sells it to you.
right,
You are going to get that pilot bill in the mail, and you are going to be paying that pilot bill, just like you would have paid a conventional tax bill. So you're going to pay, in a rental project, the developer is paying the pilot in lieu of the taxes, and the tenants are simply paying. But in for sale, where you own it, you're going to be paying a tax bill every quarter. And same, pilots are due just like taxes, February 1, May 1, 4 quarters through, 10-day grace period, et cetera.
that's still tax deductible.
I'm sorry?
Is that still tax deductible for the homeowner?
Up to the limit.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
Does the homeowner have to live on site in the home that he purchased for sale?
Well, you mean, can you then turn around and rent your project elsewhere?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, you're still gonna pay that pilot out relative to what the HOA might require, because it's typically and what your mortgage payment requires. Typically in a private residence, you can't do that.
So you do have homeowners assessment fees.
Typically, these are, yes, condos where you have a homeowners association and such a homeowners assessment.
One more question, in terms of the amortization of the pilot. That percentage, in terms of, see this percentage maybe increase every year. Is that percentage due to inflationary concerns? Or should the town have that?
The percentage of the revenues, yeah, I think
For the
that
pilot?
when we go through the analysis and set the percentages, now the pro forma models that we use will take into account whatever inflation that you might have. Typically, we run it at a 2% increase each year. So that even though it's still 10% of gross revenues, the hope is that gross revenues continue to increase, both for the developer and for the borough, because we're getting 10% of a higher number. Right.
So again, the fees that the town would get for the pilot is based upon the probability of the developer.
Yes, that's why it becomes a partnership. You do want the developer to succeed. So you want to put them in the best position to be able to do that, but you also need to get your share, the borough needs to get its share of that profit, as a tax. But you're in it together.
Of course, you will want that, you want the developer to be successful because of the fact that now you are further burdening the borough in terms of the residents and the services that the borough has to incur as a result of this population increase.
Yeah, I mean, you definitely want them to succeed. If the revenues are coming down, they're not getting the rents that they were planning on getting, then your pilot revenue would also come down, at the same level. There are minimums built into all of these agreements, so it's not as if they're going to pay zero. And in fact, with that art color site, I think the minimum was at least what we determined to be the estimated costs of school children and municipal costs coming out of that. So that particular one, it should never burden the taxpayers more than what it costed, to service that building.
Okay, thank you. If we would just hold those in the room, I'll just hit the dial-in, we can see. So anybody on the dial-in have any questions for the panel before we go back to who's sitting in the room?
Definitely, I have a question. So I saw a tabulation there of the number of students that would be additional, and it was it was a quantity of 2. So that number did not sound believable. Plus, that was for market rate units, and as you indicated, there were going to be, 50 or so affordable units, and supposedly there's another other ratios used for those, as the presenter indicated. So I wanted to see what the total tabulation is. That number, that I don't know if what he had on the screen was like an example or the real thing, as far as the tabulation of new kids who are going to be going into our schools.
Right, it was just an example if I remember correctly, using the affordable ratios that I had mentioned before, which was 0.14 for the 1 bedrooms, 0.62 for 2 bedrooms, and 1.27 for 3 bedrooms. If you apply that to, what did we say the art color site has done? What's that?
15.
Right, so 58 affordable units would produce somewhere around 35 school students based on.
All right, so where's the total tabulation? So if we've got examples here, can we see the full tabulation of the new amount of kids that are coming in?
Well, I mean, these were just examples for a general conversation about the developments and how we see them and how we recognize utilizing the revenues versus the cost of the municipality. If we have a specific site that we want to go through, we can do that. I just wasn't prepared for that tonight.
Well, so that's why we're here, to discuss what's going to the current redevelopment, not just general ideas about redevelopment, but what's actually going on. So I wanted to see the number of school kids that are coming into our district, plus that number that you gave. You said it's not the full cost, and that's true. The budget has the cost way higher than that $8,000 that you have. You didn't include any type of, extracurricular equipment, legal, admin, support services. All those kids will require that. The $8,000 is just a portion of the student cost.
Yeah, well, the costs that we use are the costs that are broken down as what it costs for a classroom instruction, which includes those services. So the total cost on a per student basis in Dunellen is over $12,000, but a lot of that is capital costs, debt service, administrative costs that are not covered, are not going to be impacted by an additional student. So when the state talks about cost of classroom instruction, those are the numbers that are typically used. In fact, it's often much less than the $8,000 because there are lots of items within the classroom that are that can be shared and are shared, and they don't have to have all new certain equipment for every student that comes in. So, but that's how the state breaks it down, and we've actually seen the costs come in much lower than that, so.
Yeah, well, it'd be nice to see the actual numbers for the money that's going to be going out versus the money that's coming in versus a bunch of examples. So when can we get those numbers, and when will they be made public?
Well, Mayor, if I can, I think if it's for art color,
That was already made public, it's already voted on in 2000.
right, that was presented years ago, and I'm sure it's still readily and publicly available. If it's for a future project that's coming online, it gets presented to the public as it gets presented to the council and considered for approval as a project and as a pilot. But so if it's one that's already been approved, that data is already readily available, has been for a while.
Oh, I'm sorry. It was very difficult to hear you, but where are those numbers then? Where are they published?
On the website, underneath redevelopment, underneath the general redevelopment section. Dr. Robbins, is that correct?
I think that Dan's report is on our redevelopment page. The one that's for, how many.
Bill, I can't hear you.
Bill is saying that there's a report that my firm and then Financial had prepared back when we had voted on the art color development that states and shows this, just what we're referring to, number of school students, costs, expenses versus the revenues coming in or estimated to come in from the development. That should be on the website.
On development, on the redevelopment website for Dunellen, you said?
Yes, Council President, on the redevelopment section of the website, we voted on it in 2017, so that information was in our package when we voted on it. So,
And does it show, and it shows the money coming in versus all the money coming out?
Yes, that should all be there, yes.
Okay, great. And then when did the 3 bedrooms get approved? Because when I had gone to presentations several years ago, before you were mayor, Mayor Celento, there was they were talking about, more 2 bedrooms, 1 bedrooms with dens. Not this 3 bedrooms. There's a lot of 3 bedrooms. When did that come to be? The larger units.
yeah, Mr. Liebling is going to discuss it. Are you referring to our Color project?
Yeah, I am actually the art color project. Yes.
I'm sorry, do you mind to state names? I don't want to refer to you as the wrong person. I believe this was the council president speaking.
Pardon?
Okay, so if I miscommunicated, I thought you were council president, I apologize.
Just speaking generally, I don't have any art color unit breakdowns in front of me. But under the uniform affordable housing controls, 2 and 3 bedroom, certain percentage of 2 and 3 bedroom units are required to be included in a project, even when there are market units, where there are none of those in the market units. The state requires the project to include 3 bedroom units. So if there are 3 bedroom units, certainly some of those, I'm just sorry, I don't have the numbers, I'm just telling you what the law is, are attributable to that requirement.
Sure, what about the rest?
I don't have the numbers in front of me, so I don't know.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, we can move on to the next question. Yes,
So I have a question for Mr. Baylor. Enjoyed the presentation. The one part that I kind of struggled to see was the survey that was taken. I was hoping you could speak a little bit more on the findings of that survey.
Sure. I mean, there was multiple questions throughout the survey. Some of them, isn't this example of the question, but for example, one of the questions was what height would you like to see in the net? And the majority of that, I don't have the percentage in front of me, but the highest percentage for that question was 3-story. There were some open possibilities to 4 stories, but that's an example of a question. Another question was, what would you like to see in terms of new public space in downtown Denellen? And that one was the highest of all the responses. It was 91%, and that was the impetus for the pop-up park to see that. But I can happily share more of the survey results with the borough, and we put it on the website.
the survey results are on the website. Yeah. Everything is on the website. We completely re-updated the whole redevelopment section. Each project is individually listed out, description of it, image of it. So everything has been made transparent and available.
Thank you.
For the affordable housing, can you apply pre-construction on the website? They're not fully built yet. Can someone put in an application?
Yeah, they're currently taking applications. So the information is on our website. It's also on the fence at the property.
Okay. Thank you.
Specifically to the Denellen station.
Yes.
Yes, sir.
Back to the school children multiplier, I'm just curious if there are any outliers to what the study showed where some towns are experiencing higher than that. And if you know, if they are, why they would be.
Actually, the information that we have seen and we've been doing, we've been working in towns like Bloomfield, Belleville. We had done a bunch in Jersey City. Most of those multipliers are actually multipliers are lower than what we're seeing. They're less than. You're seeing much less spring students coming out of the transit-oriented, especially the transit-oriented developments. As I mentioned before, the unit sizes that these developers are building are small. You know, they're not anything like the apartments that we all may have seen growing up. You know, to have a 1-bedroom, more than 600 square feet is rare now. 650 square feet. So most of them are coming down. If I find the sheet, I will give you some examples of what I have seen actually after I made a bunch of calls. So, yeah, sure.
So you've got the townhouses though. The townhouses are, I'm assuming, way bigger than 800 square foot. How big are those?
I think the townhouses are not 1 bedrooms. So.
Okay, so we are coming to an end in about 5 minutes. So I'm gonna just, I saw one hand raised, but, I'll leave the question. A lot of the concerns that I hear from residents is the density and the increase of density in the downtown and livable space. Can we, for public knowledge, let them know, or how we state that, that increased density for the residents who want the bookshop, the coffee shops, and the out, and the little boutique shop, that increase in density is really what's going to, with the expendable income, attract the type of businesses that residents who currently live here desperately want. Could someone speak to that?
Absolutely. I mean, you build it and they will come. I mean, that analogy is you need to support the businesses by having people downtown. You need the space to attract new businesses. You need people to live downtown that will go not during, go morning work and night. And then now when people working from home, they'll be around more often. So you're going to see more of a trend in that. So by having this opportunity and by having the new development downtown and further development, this will only enhance, support, and build upon downtown development and the overall.
We have time for just one last question. So I saw a hand in the room. Did I not? Did it come back there?
I can go. First of all, everybody I thought did a really great job. A great thing to hold for us to meet the professionals that are working in the borough. Dan, I think this might be directed to you. For the pilot payments that includes a portion to the school, is that just a flat percentage for the art color pilot that's gone to the school, or is it based on the actual number of students, or what was that based on?
That we exempted the land.
We did, and I believe that minimum charge that Scott, you're referring to, that the borough gets regardless of sort of the success of the project, I believe that was a per student amount. So I don't remember what it was, this was many years ago, but X dollars per student in the project is part of the formula. The formula also included, I think, Y dollars per resident relative to municipal budget charges. And I think it also included a component to make sure we also accounted for the taxes that the project was generating before, the project had been ultimately redone. Is that all?
Yeah, Scott, it doesn't come in pre-allocated. It's just to establish a pilot amount so that the borough overall expense in all those categories it doesn't become a loser, a financial loser. So that money would still come in the same way as a pilot payment, and then it would be through a shared services process or something if it were to be allocated.
Yeah, I was wondering how would it get to the board? And does the board tell us the number of students, or if it's on a per student basis, are they telling us the number of students? How is that?
Well, the thing that Chuck was referring to, when we did that, we wanted to make sure that the developer was paying a minimum amount of money to cover the cost of the students. Not that money was going to the schools, it was coming into the borough as a pilot.
Okay.
Now, once that project is built, the schools will be able to tell you how many school children are coming out of that development. And if the borough so chooses, as Matt, touched on briefly, there are ways to be able to get monies through shared services and whatnot from the borough to the schools. But remember, the way I look at that is the schools are going to put forth their budget, and it's going to get approved, and it's going to get funded through taxes. Whether or not we're making sure that we're assisting the taxpayers, whether it's from your borough tax payment side or your school tax payment side, you're being covered as a taxpayer by the pilot plan that's coming in.
All right, and then as far as the grant for the down station, when do we expect that to kick in? Sure, so that bond issue was set up to be done in two tranches, a tax exempt piece and a taxable piece. The tax exempt piece, we actually got notice from the developer maybe 2 months ago or so that they wanted to close the tax exempt piece in the fourth quarter of this year, so basically the next couple of weeks. But earlier this week, we got a revised notice saying they'd like to close it the second quarter of 2022. So the tax exempt piece, we expect second quarter of 2022. Taxable piece is likely about a year after that.
Okay, with that, I'll just conclude with Denellen's on the up. I think we can see that with the first, lastly, let's take this too. Thank you to the Denellen Downtown Management Organization and its volunteers. Thank you to the Denellen Arts and Culture Commission and its volunteers, because as a volunteer organization that are subcommittees of the municipality, look at the downtown. You see the lights, the planters, the winter scenes paint. They have done a magnificent job on helping us revitalize and beautify our downtown. And it's all on fundraising and it's all on volunteer hours. That's what makes Denellen a miracle mile. That's why we're so great. So let's give them a round of applause. Just in conclusion, we're on the up, we're redeveloping. We have to do this to sustain Denellen. We're going to do it that keeps Denellen's legacy. We're going to do it in a way that keeps Denellen quaint. So I've always said we must protect and respect our tradition while we engage the future. We have to do this to move forward. So I want to thank our volunteer panel. So just let's put that on the record. Volunteer this evening, our panel. Because this is a very important topic, and I want it to be a conversation that as a community, we go forward together, because the success is only going to be based upon what we all give to this process. So thank you all for being here. Give yourself a round of applause.